The courtroom was silent, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt calm. It was the kind that pressed down on you like a weight, making every breath feel heavy and every heartbeat sound loud in your own ears. Meghan Markle sat at the defense table, her fingers clasped tightly together, knuckles pale. Her eyes darted between her lawyers, the judge, and finally to the man she once called her everything, Prince Harry. But Harry wasn't looking at her. He was staring down at the table in front of him, his face a mixture of grief, confusion, and betrayal. For weeks, the world had been riveted by the scandal unfolding behind these walls. It had started as whispers, unconfirmed rumors on obscure blogs and online forums. But then a whistleblower came forward, someone who had worked inside a London-based adoption agency, and everything exploded. According to this source, Meghan Markle had used forged documents, backdoor payments, and powerful connections to illegally adopt a baby girl and pass her off as her own. That baby was now known to the world as Princess Lilibet Diana. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. At first, few wanted to believe it. The Sussexes had built their entire narrative around escaping royal oppression to build a new life of authenticity and family love in California. But as more details leaked, even the staunchest defenders started to hesitate. Why were there no hospital witnesses to Lilibet's birth? Why were nurses at Cedars-Sinai bound by unusually strict NDAs? And why, when a royal aide demanded a DNA test, did Meghan reportedly threaten to cut all ties with the monarchy entirely? And now, in this courtroom, it all came to a head. The prosecutor's voice broke the silence. "Mrs. Markle, do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Meghan stood slowly. For a moment, she looked as if she might collapse. Her once glossy hair hung limp, and her usually flawless makeup was streaked from tears. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she turned, not to the judge, but to Harry. Her voice was hoarse, but carried through the courtroom like a blade cutting the air. "Tell her the truth when she's old enough. Tell her I loved her, even if I wasn't allowed to keep her." Harry's head shot up, his eyes wet. Around the room, there were audible gasps. Reporters scribbled furiously, court sketch artists leaned in, and even the judge's stern face softened for a moment. What did she mean? Was she confessing to everything? Or was there still a layer of deception, a last attempt to manipulate the narrative? The bailiff stepped forward to take her away, but Meghan didn't resist. She kept her eyes on Harry, her expression unreadable. A mix of sorrow, defiance, and something else, something almost like relief. This wasn't how their fairy tale was supposed to end. Not long ago, Harry and Meghan were the darlings of a global movement. They had escaped the gilded cage of Buckingham Palace, launched multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, and presented themselves as modern royalty, fighting for justice and love. They seemed unstoppable, but perhaps it was that very ambition, that hunger to control their image and legacy, that led them here, to a scandal involving forged adoption records, international trafficking investigations, and the possibility that one of their children might not even belong to them. It all started innocently enough, or so it seemed. Meghan had spoken often of her desire for a daughter. Friends recalled her saying, even before Archie's birth, that she longed for a little girl she could name Lily, after her mother and the late Princess Diana. When Lilibet's arrival was announced, the world rejoiced. There was no photograph of Meghan leaving a hospital, no official statement from doctors. But the Sussexes claimed they wanted privacy, and most accepted that explanation without question. Behind palace doors, however, questions were already being asked. Prince William reportedly demanded proof of birth details. Senior aides noticed inconsistencies in paperwork sent to Buckingham Palace for Lilibet's inclusion in the line of succession. And then there was the strange call from a Nigerian orphanage director, asking why the American woman hadn't finalized her promised donation. Still, the truth didn't surface until now. The whistleblower, a former royal aide named Catherine Brooks, was the first to crack the facade. She claimed to have seen documents that suggested Lilibet was not born to Meghan, but rather brought into the family through a secret adoption arranged under false pretenses. Catherine alleged that Meghan's lawyers had paid off officials in multiple countries to erase records and create the illusion of a natural birth. She wanted the world to believe Lilibet was hers, Catherine said in a televised interview. But at what cost? And what about the child's real mother? Was she coerced? Or worse, was this child stolen? The media frenzy was instant. Headlines screamed betrayal. News vans surrounded the Montecito estate. Harry and Meghan released a statement calling the allegations dangerous and false. But behind closed doors, their relationship was fracturing. Harry had never questioned Meghan's story before. He loved her. He trusted her. He had sacrificed everything, his family, his titles, his homeland, to build a life with her. But now, he was being asked to consider the unthinkable, that the woman he loved had built their entire family on a lie. As Harry sat in that courtroom, watching the woman who had once been his safe place now stand accused of an unthinkable crime, he felt like the ground beneath him had vanished. What would become of Lilibet? What would the world think of him, of them? And most hauntingly, what if the truth was even darker than what had come out so far? Meghan's final words echoed in his mind like a ghost. Tell her I loved her, even if I wasn't allowed to keep her. Was she admitting guilt? Or was she still playing some deeper game, using her last chance to twist the narrative and keep control of Harry's heart? The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, snapping Harry out of his daze. Meghan was led away, her wrists bound, her face pale, but her posture unervingly straight. In the gallery, a journalist whispered to her colleague, "This isn't just the fall of a duchess. This is the unraveling of a dynasty." But for Harry, it wasn't about dynasties or headlines anymore. It was about a little girl who might one day look into his eyes and ask the question he feared most. "Daddy, am I really your daughter?" And when that day came, would he have the strength to tell her the truth? This is the story of how love turned to ashes, how ambition spiraled into ruin, and how a mother's haunting final words left a father and a nation in tears. The first whisper came from an unlikely place, a late-night phone call to a small London tabloid. The voice on the other end was trembling, hesitant, but carried a sense of urgency that made the young reporter sit up straight in her chair. "You don't know me," the caller began, her tone low and cautious. "And I don't know how long I can stay on this line. But if you care about the truth, you'll want to look into Meghan Markle and her daughter, Lilibet." The reporter, accustomed to prank calls and false leads, was about to hang up when the woman spoke again, this time more forcefully. "Check the adoption records in Lagos. Look for a girl born on June 4th, 2021. Then ask yourself why there are no hospital records in California. It's all there if you dig deep enough. But be careful, they're very good at covering their tracks." Before the reporter could ask for a name, the line went dead. The next morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another hoax. Something about the caller's voice, the desperation, the conviction, felt real. Against her editor's initial skepticism, she began digging. And what she found, in the shadows of government registries and buried court filings, was enough to send shivers down her spine. There were inconsistencies in the paperwork surrounding Lilibet's birth. The Sussexes had claimed she was born at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, but when the reporter called the hospital directly, the staff refused to confirm or deny any details, citing privacy concerns. That in itself wasn't unusual. High-profile births were often shrouded in secrecy. But one nurse, speaking under the condition of anonymity, hinted at something far stranger. "I've worked here 20 years, the nurse said quietly. "We've had celebrities, politicians, even royalty pass through these doors. But never have we been forced to sign NDAs before a birth. Never. And to my knowledge, none of us ever actually saw Mrs. Markle." The reporter's gut told her there was more to this story. And so she kept digging, cross-referencing timelines, contacting contacts in Nigeria, and slowly piecing together a puzzle that seemed too wild to be true. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the first cracks were appearing in the carefully curated image of Harry and Meghan's California life. The couple's once loyal staff members were quietly leaving their Montecito estate, some citing ethical concerns in vague exit statements. Former friends stopped responding to calls from royal biographers. And on social media, eagle-eyed followers began raising their own questions. Why haven't we seen a single photo of Meghan pregnant with Lilibet in public? One user asked on Twitter, posting side-by-side photos of Meghan's first pregnancy with Archie compared to the absence of any similar appearances in 2021. Another commenter added, "How come no one saw them leaving the hospital with the baby? Even with Archie, there was at least some announcement. Something doesn't add up." At first, these murmurs were dismissed as conspiracy theories, just another wave of anti-Meghan rhetoric from the darker corners of the internet. But then, an anonymous post appeared on a whistleblower forum frequented by investigative journalists. "I worked for an agency facilitating international adoptions," the post began. "One of our clients was a high-profile American woman who used forged paperwork to remove a child from Nigeria. I tried to raise the alarm, but was silenced by threats. I can't stay quiet anymore. If you want proof, check the records in Lagos. Case number 6723. The post included snippets of what appeared to be official documents: a Nigerian birth certificate with a redacted name, a payment record from a law firm in Los Angeles, and a partially visible passport application for an infant girl. By the time mainstream outlets picked up the story, the narrative was shifting. What had started as a murmur was now a roar echoing across the globe. In Buckingham Palace, senior aides held frantic meetings behind closed doors. King Charles reportedly slammed his fist on a polished oak table during one of these sessions, his voice rising with uncharacteristic fury. "This cannot be true," he barked at his advisors. "We need facts, not whispers. If there's even a chance this is real, the entire monarchy is at risk." Prince William, known for his calm demeanor, was said to be seething privately. According to palace sources, he demanded that Harry cooperate fully with any investigation. If this turns out to be true, William allegedly told his father, "We can't protect him anymore. Or her. The crown must come first." But Harry wasn't picking up the phone. Inside the Montecito mansion, tensions between Harry and Meghan were boiling over. Harry had always defended Meghan fiercely, even at the cost of his relationship with his family. But now doubt was creeping in. "Meg, just tell me it isn't true," he reportedly pleaded during a heated argument. Meghan's reply was icy. "Do you really think I would do something like that? After everything we've been through? How dare you even ask me that question, Harry?" Still, her refusal to offer any real proof only deepened his unease. And when investigators began circling, Harry found himself in an impossible position, torn between loyalty to his wife and the creeping fear that he'd been lied to in the most profound way imaginable. As journalists unearthed more, a darker theory began to emerge. Could Meghan have orchestrated this entire scheme to secure Lilibet's place in the royal succession line? And if so, at what cost? The Nigerian orphanage named in the leaked documents became the center of attention. Staff members there admitted that a foreign woman had visited in early 2021 under the guise of charity work. "She was very charming," one worker recalled, "but she seemed unusually interested in the light-skinned babies. We thought she wanted to help, but then one of the infants disappeared from our registry weeks later. We were told the child had been adopted legally, but now I'm not so sure." The child in question matched Lilibet's description. By the time the case reached the courts, the world was no longer asking if the allegations were true. They were asking how far Meghan would go to preserve her image, and whether Harry had been her victim, her accomplice, or both. As the first day of the trial ended, reporters clustered outside the courthouse, shouting questions. "Harry, do you still trust Meghan? Is Lilibet really your daughter?" Harry didn't answer. He kept his head down, shielding his eyes from the flashbulbs as he climbed into a waiting car. But those who saw him up close said his face was pale, his eyes hollow, as if he'd aged 10 years in a single day. And still, in the back of his mind, one question echoed louder than the rest. If the allegations were true, who was Lilibet's real mother? And what had happened to her? The whispers were no longer whispers. They had become a storm. And for Harry and Meghan, there was no escaping it. The illusion had been so perfectly crafted. A soft focus photograph of tiny baby feet cradled gently in Meghan's hands. A glowing press release announcing the safe arrival of Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, born on June 4, 2021, in Santa Barbara. The Sussexes' fans rejoiced, royal watchers offered their congratulations, and the world believed the fairy tale without question. But behind palace doors, the story felt oddly incomplete. Traditionally, royal births, no matter how private, had some traceable details. Even Archie's arrival, which Harry and Meghan had tried to shield from public scrutiny, still left a trail of hospital records, confirmed doctors, and discreet but visible security details. But with Lilibet, there were none of those markers. No one remembered seeing Meghan in the final weeks of her pregnancy. No medical staff had publicly spoken, and even the official announcement lacked the hallmark details that usually accompanied such news. It was as if Lilibet had simply appeared. Inside Buckingham Palace, aides were growing increasingly uneasy. One senior advisor described those days as a creeping fog of suspicion. Small inconsistencies in paperwork submitted by the Sussexes raised red flags. According to palace sources, when the Sussexes requested that Lilibet be added to the line of succession, the supporting documents contained errors that defied explanation. Dates didn't match. Signatures looked suspiciously similar across different forms. And most disturbingly, the birth certificate from Santa Barbara was sealed under a privacy order. King Charles, still reeling from the damage caused by Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview months earlier, demanded answers. "This cannot be overlooked," he reportedly told his private secretary. "We are dealing with the legitimacy of the royal bloodline itself." The responsibility fell to a group of senior aides known informally as the Grey Men. For decades, they had protected the institution from scandals large and small. Now they were tasked with investigating one of the most delicate and potentially devastating questions in royal history. Was Meghan Markle really Lilibet's mother? In California, Meghan was curating a very different narrative. On social media, she shared inspirational quotes about motherhood and resilience. Her Spotify podcast touched on topics like healing ancestral pain and the sacred bond between mother and daughter. Photographers occasionally caught glimpses of Harry walking Archie to preschool, but Lilibet was never seen. Even paparazzi couldn't produce a single candid shot of Meghan out with her infant daughter. Some fans praised her for protecting her children's privacy. Others began to wonder if there was a deeper reason for the secrecy. Then came the leak. A British tabloid published excerpts from a confidential conversation between a royal aide and the Sussexes' California-based lawyer. The aide had asked for verification of Meghan's pregnancy and delivery, citing the importance of maintaining the integrity of the royal line. According to the transcript, Meghan's lawyer responded curtly, "My client does not owe you or your institution proof of her reproductive history. Any further intrusion will be met with legal action." But the lawyer's response only added fuel to the fire. Why would Meghan refuse such a simple request if she had nothing to hide? As whispers turned into headlines, a woman named Catherine Brooks stepped forward. A former nurse at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, she claimed to have insider knowledge about Lilibet's supposed birth. "I was working in the maternity ward during the time Meghan was said to have delivered," Catherine said during an interview with an investigative podcast. "But there was no record of her ever being admitted. No doctors or nurses I spoke with had seen her. It was like a ghost pregnancy." Catherine added that shortly after Lilibet's birth announcement, Cedars-Sinai staff were required to sign unusually strict non-disclosure agreements. "They told us it was standard for high-profile patients," she said. But something felt off. They didn't even tell us who we were protecting. Meanwhile, journalists began investigating adoption records abroad. In Lagos, Nigeria, a local official hinted at a troubling possibility. "We had a case of an American woman who came here claiming she was filming a documentary about orphanages," he said. "She took a keen interest in a baby girl of mixed heritage. The next thing we knew, the baby was gone. We were told the adoption was legal, but the paperwork was irregular. Then we were told never to speak of it again." The baby's birth date matched Lilibet's. Back in Montecito, Harry was spiraling. According to sources close to the couple, Harry had begun asking questions he never thought he'd ask. He pored over Meghan's photos from 2021, scrutinizing them for signs of a bump. He asked their household staff if they remembered seeing Meghan visibly pregnant. And in the privacy of their bedroom, he confronted his wife. "Meg, I need you to tell me the truth," Harry reportedly said one night. "Was Lilibet born to you? Or was she adopted?" Meghan didn't answer right away. Instead, she fixed him with a look he couldn't read. "Hurt? Anger? Fear? How dare you ask me that?" she finally said. "After everything I've done for you, for us. You sound just like them. The family that never accepted me." Harry tried again. "I'm not accusing you. I just need to understand. If there's something I don't know, tell me. Please." But Meghan shut down. "I won't have this conversation. Not with you. Not with anyone." That night, Harry couldn't sleep. The next morning, he received a call from his brother. "Harry, listen to me," William said. "We're not doing this to hurt you, but you need to get a DNA test." For your sake and for hers. If you won't do it for the family, do it for your daughter. Harry hung up without responding. But the seed of doubt had been planted. When investigators uncovered financial transactions linking Meghan's charity foundation to a Nigerian adoption agency, Harry confronted her again. This time, his voice cracked with anguish. "Meg, did you pay for Lilibet? Is that how we got her?" Meghan's response was chillingly calm. "She's ours, Harry. That's all that matters. Don't let them destroy what we have." But as more evidence surfaced, missing medical records, forged signatures, secret payments, Harry could no longer ignore the possibility that Meghan's version of events was not the whole truth. For the first time, he looked at his wife and felt something he'd never felt before. Fear. The world was beginning to see cracks in Meghan's carefully constructed image. But Harry was seeing an entirely different fracture, the possibility that the little girl he called his daughter might not even be his. As he held Lilibet in his arms that night, her tiny hand clutching his finger, he whispered, "Who are you really, my sweet girl? And what have we done?" Outside their mansion, reporters camped in vans, cameras trained on the gates. They were waiting for a glimpse of the couple, for a comment, for anything to confirm or deny the rumors tearing through the headlines. But Harry and Meghan stayed silent. And in that silence, the question grew louder. Where was the girl who was supposed to have been there? The operation began long before anyone suspected a thing. It didn't start in Montecito or even in the UK, but thousands of miles away, in a dusty office in Lagos, Nigeria, where records of births, adoptions, and deaths were still logged in handwritten ledgers stacked on creaking wooden shelves. Months before the world ever heard the name Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, a foreign woman with a flawless American accent walked through the orphanage's sun-baked gates. Dressed in casual linen and oversized sunglasses, she introduced herself as a filmmaker and philanthropist, interested in supporting children's welfare initiatives in the region. She was very warm, very charming, recalled one worker at the orphanage. She spent hours with the babies, holding them, asking questions about their health. But she kept coming back to one child in particular, a baby girl, light-skinned, with a tuft of red-gold hair. She said the child had special eyes. At first, the staff didn't think much of it. Wealthy donors often took a special interest in certain children, hoping to sponsor their education or improve their living conditions. But something about this visit was different. Within 2 weeks, the child was gone. Officially, the baby had been adopted by an American couple. The paperwork looked legitimate, at least on the surface. But when Nigerian authorities later examined those records under pressure from British investigators, troubling anomalies surfaced. Signatures didn't match known officials. Stamps were outdated, and the agency listed as overseeing the adoption hadn't existed for nearly 3 years. Someone went to great lengths to make it look legal, said a source in Nigeria's Ministry of Women's Affairs. But to anyone who knows how these processes actually work, it was sloppy. Too many inconsistencies. The child's birth date? June 4, 2021. The same day Meghan Markle announced she had given birth to Lilibet in Santa Barbara. As investigators began to connect the dots, the code name emerged, Operation Paper Baby. It wasn't clear who coined the phrase, but among royal aides and journalists, it stuck. It referred to the elaborate web of forgeries, bribes, and legal loopholes allegedly used to secure a child for the Sussexes. A child Meghan intended to present to the world as her biological daughter. The whistleblower, Catherine Brooks, provided key insight into how it worked. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision, she said during a secret interview with an investigative team. It was a calculated plan. Meghan and her legal team explored every option to make this ironclad. They knew the world would scrutinize this child's legitimacy. So they didn't just fake a birth, they faked a history. Catherine explained how Meghan's lawyers had allegedly forged prenatal medical records, created fake ultrasound images, and even staged private meetings with doctors who later signed confidentiality agreements. They built an entire narrative around Meghan's pregnancy, Catherine said. The world believed it because they wanted to believe it. She played on our collective obsession with royal babies. But even the best-laid plans have flaws. One critical mistake involved a Los Angeles-based surrogate who was initially approached for the arrangement. According to leaked emails, the surrogate backed out at the last minute, fearing the legal and ethical implications. Meghan's team, desperate to avoid delays, allegedly turned to international adoption as a backup plan. This was where things started to unravel, said Catherine. International adoption laws are strict for a reason, but Meghan's lawyers thought they were untouchable. They assumed that money and influence could buy silence at every level. In many ways, they were right. For months, there were no leaks, no suspicions. The Sussexes announced Lilibet's birth and retreated behind the high gates of their Montecito estate. Supporters flooded social media with congratulations and gushed over the meaning of the baby's name, a tribute to Queen Elizabeth's childhood nickname and Harry's late mother, Diana. But there was no hospital photo, no royal photographer capturing Meghan leaving a maternity ward, no doctors publicly confirming the birth. And for those who dared to ask questions, there were lawyers. Multiple journalists reported receiving cease and desist letters after inquiring about Lilibet's birth details. Even medical professionals were warned against speaking to the press. Her team was like a fortress, one investigative reporter said. They anticipated every question and shut it down before it could gain traction. If you pushed, they'd threaten to sue you into bankruptcy. But not everyone could be silenced. A clerk in Lagos, whose cousin worked at the orphanage, came forward with copies of documents that didn't align with Nigerian legal procedures. A payment of $450,000 had been wired from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands to a law firm tied to Meghan's charity foundation. The clerk claimed he was offered a bribe to destroy the original adoption records, but refused. I didn't know who the child was meant for, the clerk said. But when I saw her in the news months later, my stomach dropped. It was her. The same baby. As details of Operation Paper Baby emerged, the narrative shifted. This wasn't just a story about a possible fraudulent adoption. It was about power, privilege, and a mother's desperate gamble to secure her legacy. Back in California, Harry was crumbling. Friends described him as a man in torment, pacing the halls of his Montecito home late at night, unable to eat or sleep. Harry felt trapped, said a source close to the prince. If he defended Meghan and the allegations turned out to be true, he'd lose all credibility. If he turned on her, he'd lose his family. He kept asking, what if this destroys Lily? What if she grows up hating me? The royal family, meanwhile, was in damage control mode. Queen Camilla reportedly urged King Charles to make a public statement denouncing the allegations. The monarchy cannot be associated with this kind of scandal, Camilla was overheard saying. But Charles hesitated. He feared that any comment would pour fuel on the fire. And secretly, he worried that his son might truly be involved in something far darker than the public knew. As for Meghan, she maintained her innocence. In private conversations with her legal team, she expressed outrage at the accusations. This is character assassination, she said. They're punishing me for being different, for breaking the rules. They couldn't handle a biracial woman in the royal family, and now they're trying to take away my child. But in the quiet moments, when no one was watching, those closest to her said her confidence wavered. One former aide described seeing Meghan staring at a framed photo of Lilibet on her bedside table, tears streaming down her face. She whispered something I'll never forget, the aide said. I just wanted her to be mine. Operation Paper Baby was no longer a theory. It was becoming a global scandal with potentially devastating consequences. And for Harry and Meghan, the reckoning had only just begun. The story might have remained hidden forever if not for one woman. Catherine Brooks didn't look like a revolutionary. She was quiet, unassuming, with the kind of face people didn't notice in a crowd. But beneath her calm exterior was a mind sharp enough to spot patterns others missed and a conscience heavy enough to risk everything for the truth. For months, Catherine had kept her head down, watching events unfold from the shadows. As a former senior administrator at a London-based law firm, she'd been tasked with auditing overseas transactions for high-profile clients. That was how she first stumbled upon the paperwork. Oddly redacted files involving offshore accounts, sealed birth certificates, and a flurry of communications between Meghan Markle's legal representatives and an obscure adoption agency in Nigeria. At first, she thought little of it. Celebrity clients often had complex arrangements to protect their privacy. But as she sifted through more documents, unease began to creep in. Something didn't add up, Catherine later recalled in an exclusive interview with an investigative journalist. The payment trail was too convoluted. It was like they'd gone out of their way to hide where the money was going, but not quite carefully enough. And then I saw the name. Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor. That name, tied to documents referencing an infant girl from Lagos, Nigeria, sent chills through her. Catherine's hands trembled as she scrolled through emails labeled urgent and strictly confidential. The tone of the correspondence was panicked, desperate even, with Meghan's lawyers pressuring foreign officials to expedite a child's exit visa and ensure discretion at every level. It was in that moment Catherine realized she was staring at a potential royal scandal so explosive it could rock the foundations of the British monarchy. For weeks, she wrestled with her conscience. Her job, her safety, her family's security, all were on the line if she spoke out. But each time she saw Lilibet's image plastered across news outlets, hailed as a symbol of love and modernity, Catherine's guilt grew heavier. This wasn't about me, she said quietly. It was about that little girl and the right of the world to know if her story had been manipulated for power and profit. Catherine reached out to multiple media organizations, but most dismissed her claims as too dangerous to touch. Some feared crippling lawsuits from Meghan's formidable legal team. Others suspected it was a conspiracy theory planted by Meghan's detractors. Then one reporter listened. Julian Hayes was no stranger to controversy. As an award-winning investigative journalist, he had spent his career exposing corruption at the highest levels. When Catherine contacted him under the alias Elizabeth Green, Julian's first instinct was skepticism. But after reviewing the initial trove of documents she provided, his skepticism turned to grim determination. What struck me was how methodical it all was, Julian later said. This wasn't some messy scam. This was a carefully orchestrated operation, with professionals covering every trace. And yet, they missed something, Catherine. To protect her identity, Catherine and Julian agreed to meet in a remote countryside in outside London. Security cameras were disabled. Phones were left behind. For 3 hours, Catherine laid out everything she knew. Dates, transactions, names of officials in Lagos and Los Angeles who might have been involved. She even brought a USB drive containing copies of critical documents. Wire transfers from Meghan's charitable foundation to a Lagos-based adoption broker. Contracts with confidentiality clauses so aggressive they bordered on intimidation, and a sealed court order authorizing the baby's name change. Julian couldn't believe what he was seeing. If this is true, he said, it's not just a scandal. It's theft of identity at a global level. Catherine nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. That child deserves to know who she really is. The two parted with a plan. Julian would begin publishing Catherine's revelations in carefully timed installments, shielding her identity while verifying the information with independent sources. The first article hit the internet like a thunderclap. Royal secrets. Insider claims Meghan Markle orchestrated international adoption fraud. Within hours, it was trending worldwide. Social media erupted in a storm of outrage, disbelief, and wild speculation. Supporters of the Sussexes dismissed the report as a smear campaign by the British tabloids. But others pointed to the mounting evidence and asked questions Meghan's team refused to answer. Where was the birth certificate? Why had no one outside their inner circle seen Meghan pregnant? Why had their legal team fought so hard to seal records about Lilibet's arrival? As the controversy spread, Buckingham Palace issued a terse statement. These are serious allegations which require careful consideration. Her Majesty's government and the appropriate authorities are reviewing the matter. Behind the scenes, the royal family was in crisis. King Charles summoned his advisors for a midnight meeting. The atmosphere was tense, charged with fear and fury. If these claims are proven true, Charles said, his voice hoarse, this could bring down the monarchy. Our enemies will seize on it. Our allies will abandon us. We must get ahead of this. Prince William, usually the peacemaker, was livid. He reportedly accused Harry of endangering the family with his choices. We warned him about her, William told his father. We warned him over and over. And now look where we are. But Harry wasn't returning their calls. In Montecito, Harry and Meghan huddled with their lawyers, trying to contain the fallout. Meghan was described as alternating between rage and despair. This is character assassination, she told her team. They've hated me from the start because I don't fit their mold. Now they're using my daughter to destroy me. But privately, Meghan's confidence was cracking. Her lawyers had warned her that if investigators dug too deep, There were documents she couldn't suppress, payments she couldn't explain away. Harry, too, was unraveling. Friends said he barely ate, barely slept, and spent hours staring blankly at family photos. He kept asking the same haunting question. Did she ever tell me the truth? Or was it all a lie? When Catherine's identity was leaked to the press weeks later, the story took an even darker turn. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox. Her phone rang with strange calls at all hours. A car followed her home from the grocery store one night, its headlights blinding her rearview mirror until she pulled into a police station parking lot. "They're trying to scare me into silence," Catherine told Julian during a frantic phone call. "But I won't back down. Not now." Julian's next article ended with a quote from Catherine that set the world on fire. "If Meghan really loves that child, she'll come forward and tell the truth. Otherwise, the truth will find her anyway." And so, the stage was set for the next chapter. A courtroom showdown that would lay bare secrets no one was prepared to confront. The whistleblower had spoken. The question now was how far Meghan would go to silence her, and what Harry would do when faced with the horrifying possibility that Catherine might be right. The request was simple on paper. A single swab, a few strands of hair, and within days the world would have its answer. But in reality, the demand for a DNA test shattered what little remained of Harry and Meghan's fragile world. It wasn't the first time questions had been raised about Lilibet's parentage. In hushed voices behind gilded palace doors and in bold letters splashed across tabloid covers, people wondered if the child carried the blood of the House of Windsor at all. But until now, Harry had refused to entertain such insinuations. To him, Lilibet was his daughter, his flesh and blood, and he would not allow anyone, not even his own family, to cast doubt on that bond. But now, with evidence mounting, Harry's certainty was slipping. The moment came one cool California morning when an envelope arrived at the Sussex's Montecito estate. It bore the royal crest and Harry's full title, though it had long been stripped from official use. The letter inside was direct and clinical. "In light of recent allegations regarding the legitimacy of Lady Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor's birth and her position in the line of succession, we formally request a paternity test to confirm her biological relationship to His Royal Highness Prince Henry Charles Albert David." Harry stared at the letter for what felt like an eternity, his hands trembling. "They can't do this," Meghan snapped, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "This is an attack. They've always hated me, Harry, and now they're using our daughter to destroy us." Harry wanted to believe her. He wanted to wrap his arms around her and tell her everything would be fine. But a tiny, insistent voice in the back of his mind asked a question he couldn't silence. What if they're right? That night, after Meghan had gone to bed, Harry sat in Lilibet's nursery, staring at the little girl sleeping soundly in her crib. Her small chest rose and fell with each breath. Her fingers twitched in dreams. And for the first time, he allowed himself to really look at her, not as her father, but as a man trying to solve a mystery he didn't want to believe existed. Her eyes, they were so different from his, different even from Meghan's. Her hair had a reddish tinge, yes, but so did millions of children around the world. And her features, had he been lying to himself when he said he saw Meghan's nose in her profile? He felt sick. When the request for DNA was made public, it divided the world. Supporters of Meghan and Harry rallied behind them, calling the demand invasive and racist. "Leave them alone," read one trending hashtag. "Lilibet is Harry's daughter in every way that matters." But others insisted it was a fair question. A child in the royal line of succession had to meet certain legal and genetic standards. If Meghan has nothing to hide, one commentator asked pointedly, why refuse a simple test? Even within Harry's circle of friends, opinions were split. One longtime confidant reportedly told him, "Mate, you have to be sure. You need to know, for you and for her." But Meghan's reaction was unequivocal. "Over my dead body," she hissed when Harry broached the subject. "I will not let them poke and prod our daughter like she's some science experiment. Don't you see? This is their game. They want to humiliate us." Harry didn't respond, because deep down, he feared Meghan wasn't. If the test comes back negative, one senior aide warned, we'll have no choice but to remove Lilibet from the line of succession immediately. It's not just protocol, it's survival. The monarchy cannot afford even a hint of illegitimacy. Privately, William was said to be furious. I begged him to think carefully before marrying her, he told a confidant. Now look at the mess we're in. If this turns out to be true, Harry will never forgive himself. As the pressure mounted, Harry began to crack. He stopped answering calls from his family. He avoided Meghan's gaze. He barely ate or slept. In the rare moments he spoke, his words were often muttered half to himself. I don't know what's real anymore, he confessed to one friend. I thought I knew her. I thought I knew us. But what if the last few years have been one big lie? The breaking point came when a second set of documents surfaced, leaked by Catherine Brooks and verified by multiple news outlets. Among them was a hospital form signed by a doctor in Lagos, confirming the live birth of a baby girl matching Lilibet's description. The baby's mother was listed as Jane Doe. The adoptive parents were unnamed. Harry couldn't ignore it anymore. I have to know, he whispered one evening, staring at Meghan with red-rimmed eyes. If there's even a chance. I can't live like this. Meghan's face hardened. If you do this, Harry, it's over. You're choosing them over me. Over us. But Harry was already reaching for the phone. Within days, arrangements were made for an independent laboratory to conduct a discreet paternity test. A courier arrived under cover of night to collect samples from Harry and Lilibet. Meghan refused to participate, locking herself in her room and refusing to speak to anyone. The world waited. Reporters camped outside the Montecito estate. News networks speculated endlessly about what the results might reveal. Some outlets even began running computer-generated what-if images, showing what Lilibet might look like if she were the child of someone else entirely. When the results came back, Harry opened the envelope with shaking hands. He read the first line, then the second. His knees gave way beneath him. The report was inconclusive. Due to irregularities in the child's genetic markers, the test could not definitively confirm or deny paternity. The lab recommended further testing and the participation of the mother to achieve a reliable result. But Meghan was still refusing. Harry crumpled the report in his hand and buried his face in his palms. I don't even know what to pray for anymore, he whispered. The DNA mystery had deepened, not resolved. And in its shadow, a darker question began to take shape. If Lilibet wasn't Meghan's child, whose was she? It had started, as most high-stakes gambles do, with an unshakable belief in control. From the moment Meghan Markle walked into Harry's life, she seemed to understand power in a way few outsiders ever did. She recognized that the British monarchy wasn't just an institution. It was a machine of image and influence, a centuries-old narrative that could either crush you or, if played wisely, catapult you into untouchable status. For Meghan, the gamble was never just about love. It was about legacy. She told me once, said a former friend from her Hollywood circle, that she wasn't interested in being famous for the sake of it. She wanted to be remembered, to rewrite history on her terms. She said, the only way to truly change the world is to control the story. So when Meghan and Harry announced their shocking decision to step back from royal duties in early 2020, many assumed they were retreating. In reality, they were repositioning. The couple moved swiftly, signing multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, launching a nonprofit foundation, and building a public image around humanitarianism and independence. But in private, there was a growing tension. To retain their security and privileges, Harry and Meghan needed to remain connected to the monarchy, even as they publicly distanced themselves from it. That connection came in the form of their children, Archie and, later, Lilibet. The line of succession was not just symbolic, it was a lifeline. Having a child in the direct royal bloodline secured their place in history, said one palace insider. It guaranteed them influence for decades, whether they were working royals or not. But there was a problem. By late 2020, Meghan's attempts to conceive a second child had reportedly ended in heartbreak. Friends later spoke of a miscarriage that devastated her. Meghan herself alluded to the loss in a deeply personal essay, but few knew how profoundly it affected her sense of purpose. She felt like her body had betrayed her, a source close to Meghan revealed. And she began talking about how the universe didn't always give you what you deserved. You had to take it. That's when the plan was born. According to evidence presented later in court, Meghan's lawyers began making quiet inquiries into international adoption options. At first, they approached private surrogacy agencies in California, but legal complications around royal succession made it risky. It had to look like a natural birth, explained Catherine Brooks, the whistleblower. Anything else would raise questions about legitimacy. Meghan was adamant about that. The choice of Nigeria surprised some observers. Why not Europe, where laws were less restrictive? Or the United States, where she could have maintained plausible deniability? But Meghan reportedly saw an opportunity to align her personal story with her carefully cultivated image as a global humanitarian. She wanted a daughter who looked like the perfect blend of her and Harry, Catherine said. Someone light enough to fit seamlessly into the Windsor line, but with just enough of Meghan's features to silence skeptics. To Meghan, it wasn't just about creating a family. It was about crafting a legacy. She would talk about Lilibet as if the child already existed, said another former staffer. She called her my little princess, and she'd say, when the world sees her, they'll know we're the future of the monarchy. When the Lagos Adoption Agency warned Meghan's team that legal delays could jeopardize the timeline, her lawyers pushed harder. Leaked emails later revealed Meghan's personal involvement in pressuring foreign officials to expedite the process. I need this resolved now, Meghan allegedly wrote in one email. Every day we wait increases the risk of exposure. You understand what's at stake. And so, Operation Paper Baby was executed with precision. The child was quietly removed from the Lagos orphanage under the guise of a charity transfer, flown to an undisclosed location in Morocco for medical evaluations, and eventually brought into the United States on an expedited visa. Within weeks, Meghan was photographed walking in Montecito wearing loose clothing and shielding her abdomen from view. Paparazzi speculated about a possible pregnancy. Meghan's team neither confirmed nor denied the rumors, allowing them to grow unchecked. By the time Meghan and Harry announced Lilibet's birth in June 2021, the story was firmly in place. A carefully worded press release celebrated the arrival of a healthy baby girl born at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. There were no photos leaving the hospital, no doctors giving interviews, no birth certificate released to the public. For most people, that didn't matter. Meghan and Harry's narrative was so powerful, so emotionally resonant, that few questioned its authenticity. But for those within the monarchy, alarm bells were already ringing. Palace officials quietly requested proof of birth from Meghan's legal team. Instead of providing it, they received a strongly worded letter threatening legal action for harassment and violation of privacy. They thought they could stonewall us forever, said a royal aide. But you can't hide the truth forever, not when the stakes are this high. As scrutiny intensified, Meghan doubled down. She gave interviews emphasizing her role as a mother, often tearing up when speaking about the bond between her and her children. But behind closed doors, Harry was growing uneasy. He started noticing little things, said a friend of the prince. Meghan was oddly protective of Lilibet, even with him. She didn't want him alone with the baby for too long, and she would get defensive whenever he asked about the birth. Harry's doubts reached a breaking point when he stumbled upon a hidden folder on Meghan's laptop. Inside were photographs of a Lagos orphanage and correspondence with an adoption agency. When he confronted her, Meghan reportedly didn't deny the photos but dismissed his concerns. You're letting them get into your head, she said. This is exactly what they want, to tear us apart. Don't give them the satisfaction. But Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She's ours, Harry, Meghan said one night as they stood in Lilibet's nursery. That's all that matters. But for Harry, it wasn't enough. If Lilibet wasn't really Meghan's daughter, if the entire narrative had been built on a lie, what did that mean for him? For their family? For the monarchy? Meghan had made her gamble. Now the whole world was watching to see if it would pay off, or come crashing down around her. The first reaction from Buckingham Palace wasn't outrage. It wasn't even shock. It was silence, an eerie, deliberate stillness that sent shivers through every corridor of power. For centuries, the monarchy had weathered storms of scandal, affairs, divorces, financial improprieties, even whispers of illegitimacy. But nothing had prepared them for this. A child's existence, at the center of the royal bloodline, was being called into question. The Queen's senior advisors, known as the Men in Grey, convened in the early hours after the first wave of media reports hit. They sat in a wood-paneled war room deep within Buckingham Palace, their faces pale under the flicker of ancient chandeliers. This isn't just another tabloid frenzy, one of them said gravely. If the allegations are true, the ramifications are catastrophic. The line of succession itself could be compromised. King Charles arrived minutes later, his usually calm demeanor replaced with cold fury. He had been awake all night, pacing the private quarters he once shared with Diana, his mind racing with impossible scenarios. "How could this happen under our noses?" he demanded. "We asked for documentation. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. And now we look like fools." The room fell silent. No one dared remind him that he had been the one to advise restraint when Harry first cut ties with the family. But William wasn't silent. His face tight with anger, he slammed his fist on the table. "We warned him. We told Harry over and over that this woman," he caught himself, "that Meghan couldn't be trusted. And now look where we are. The entire monarchy is hanging by a thread because he couldn't see through her." An aide stepped forward cautiously. "Your Majesty, if I may, the Sussex team has already issued a statement denying everything. They claim the documents are forgeries and that Catherine Brooks is a disgruntled former employee seeking attention." Charles scoffed. "Of course they deny it. But the evidence is mounting, and the public is starting to believe it. We cannot let this spiral out of our control." It wasn't just the public that concerned him. Behind the scenes, key allies in government and the Commonwealth were expressing alarm. Questions were being asked in Parliament about whether Lilibet should remain in the line of succession until the matter was resolved. Leaders in Australia and Canada quietly inquired about the stability of the monarchy. If it's proven that Lilibet is not biologically connected to the Windsor bloodline, one senior minister warned, this isn't just a family matter. It's a constitutional crisis. William leaned forward, his eyes dark. "We have to force Harry's hand. If he refuses a DNA test, we'll have no choice but to make the results of our own investigation public. The public will forgive almost anything, except being lied to about the future of the crown." But Charles hesitated. He still remembered the little boy who clung to Diana's skirts, who sobbed at her funeral, who grew up lost in the shadow of duty and expectation. "That's still my son," he said quietly. William's voice hardened. "And this is still your crown. If you don't act now, there might not be a monarchy left to protect." Meanwhile, in Montecito, the walls were closing in. Harry had stopped answering calls from his father and brother. Meghan advised him to cut all contact, arguing that they were conspiring against them. "They've always hated me, Harry," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "They never accepted us, and now they're using our daughter to destroy everything we've built. You can't let them win." But Harry wasn't so sure anymore. When a royal aide leaked internal memos about the palace's quiet investigation into Lilibet's birth, Harry began to question whether Meghan's story could withstand scrutiny. He pored over the documents late at night, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking. Why had no one outside their inner circle seen Meghan during her supposed pregnancy? Why had she refused even private visits from his family after Lilibet's birth? And why, when pressed for proof, did her lawyers react with such aggression? One evening, Harry received a call from Princess Eugenie, the cousin who had always been closest to him. "I'm not calling to judge you," she said gently. I'm worried. About you. About the kids. If there's nothing to hide, why not take the test and end this?" Harry's voice cracked. "Because if there is something to hide, Eugenie, I don't know if I can survive knowing it." At the same time, the palace was orchestrating a careful PR offensive. Queen Camilla, ever the strategist, began meeting with senior communications staff to prepare contingency plans. "If this story proves true," she told them, "we must be seen to act swiftly and decisively. The public will forgive Harry's mistakes, but they will not forgive ours if we appear complicit." A trusted royal historian was quietly commissioned to draft statements reaffirming the sanctity of the royal bloodline. Constitutional lawyers were consulted about the unprecedented possibility of removing a child from the line of succession. "Prepare for every outcome," Camilla said flatly, "and pray we never have to use these plans." Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered. Some waved Union Jacks and chanted their support for the monarchy. Others carried signs reading, "Justice for Harry and Meghan," and "Hands off baby Lily." The nation was dividing, and the cracks were widening. One late night in the palace, William confided in his father. "This isn't just about Harry anymore," he said. "It's about the crown, the Commonwealth, and the future of this country. We can't let personal feelings cloud our judgment." Charles rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of 1,000 years of history pressing down on him. God help us all if the truth is as bad as we fear. The palace had reacted. The chessboard was set, and the next move belonged to Harry, whether he was ready to make it or not. The Harry the world once knew, the smiling young prince, the charming soldier, the man who had been called the people's son, was gone. In his place stood a man unmoored, staggering through the wreckage of a life he thought he'd built on love, but now feared was a mirage. The Montecito mansion, once a symbol of escape and rebirth, felt like a gilded prison. The walls seemed to whisper accusations as Harry paced its endless hallways late into the night, haunted by questions he could no longer push away. Who is Lilibet really? Was Meghan ever telling the truth? And, most terrifying of all, if the child wasn't Meghan's, could she even be his? His days became a blur. Mornings passed with Harry barely acknowledging Archie's chatter or Lilibet's cries. Meals sat untouched. His hair grew wilder, his eyes ringed with dark shadows. Friends who called out of concern found him evasive, his responses clipped and robotic. He was a shell of himself, said one confidant who managed to visit the estate before Meghan tightened the gates. I've known Harry for decades, but I didn't recognize the man sitting in that room. He just stared at the floor, wringing his hands. When I asked if he was all right, he said, I don't know what's real anymore. Maybe nothing ever was. Meghan noticed the change in him too, but her approach was different. She alternated between tenderness and fury, sometimes holding his face in her hands and whispering reassurances, other times snapping at him to be a man and fight back against the wolves at the gate. They've always wanted to destroy us, Harry, she hissed during one particularly heated argument. And now you're letting them win. I gave up everything for you. My career, my family, my freedom. And this is how you repay me? By doubting me. Harry flinched at her words, but said nothing. He wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe her. But deep down, doubt had rooted itself in his heart, and no amount of anger or affection could tear it out. The breaking point came one afternoon when Harry found himself alone in Lilibet's nursery. He stood over her crib, watching her tiny chest rise and fall. Her hand opened and closed in sleep, her lips forming soft, soundless murmurs. She looked so perfect, so innocent. But as Harry studied her delicate features, an ache bloomed in his chest. He searched her face for signs of himself, his nose, his eyes, his unmistakable Windsor jawline, and saw nothing. In that moment, a thought flashed through his mind so quickly it felt like a sin. What if she's not mine? The thought sent him reeling. He staggered back from the crib, his heart pounding. He pressed a hand to his mouth, trying to choke back a sob. No, he whispered to himself. She's mine. She has to be. But the whisper didn't sound convincing, not even to him. Harry's private torment soon began to spill into his public life. When photographers caught a rare glimpse of him driving through Montecito, he looked gaunt and distracted. A video surfaced of him at a local farmer's market, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles were white, his voice rising as he argued with someone unseen. You don't understand, he shouted. You don't know what it's like to question everything, to question yourself. The video went viral within hours. In London, royal aides watched with growing concern. William, though still furious with his brother, confided in a friend that he feared Harry was losing his grip. He's been isolated for too long, William said. She's cut him off from everyone who ever cared about him. If we don't find a way to reach him, I'm afraid of what he might do. But reaching Harry was easier said than done. Meghan had tightened her circle, screening his calls, intercepting emails, and insisting that he needed space from the family that had abandoned him. This is our fight, Harry, she told him one night, her eyes blazing. Not theirs. If you can't see that, then maybe they've already won. But even Meghan's words, once so persuasive, were losing their power over him. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Meghan slept beside him, Harry lay.